r/scare stories. Posted by u/vaders_fist_501. If you should find bottled water, whatever you do, don't drink it. I'm from a small rural town in southern Michigan. I'm writing this story as a warning to anyone who is still out there. Do not drink the water. Last summer the state had received federal funding for a new water purification system to deal with the Flint water crisis. The purification center was built 2 miles from my home thanks to the abundance of freshwater lakes and rivers in the area. The water would be purified and sent among pipelines all the way throughout the state. Public support of this project was very high. It created new job opportunities and helped solve a water crisis. Or so we thought. The facility was massive. Built on one of the biggest lakes in the county. The entire facility was surrounded with a perimeter fence to ensure proper security and to prevent tampering. There was even rumors of sniper encampment all around the facility. No one who isn't authorized access into the facility is allowed with half a mile of the perimeter fence. I wondered why all this security was necessary for this facility, but thinking to myself I figured that it made some sense, considering this was the largest water purification facility in the country. About 6 months after the facility began operating, things began to happen in the area. The local plant life and animals who inhabited the region around the facility began to become sick and die. For many months, the execs stated the rapid spread of chronic wasting disease, CWD, and certain types of fungal infections were to blame for the illnesses among animals and plants. After months of griping from the town council, and DNR, an investigation was conducted. The government played it off as a chemical spill. But I was very skeptical to the truth. Chemical spill? What kind of hazardous chemical needs to be used for water purification? The public was outraged, but soon forgot as the government remained quiet on the situation. About a year after the whole ordeal, the facility began offering a water delivery service to the surrounding area. Many people flocked to purchase subscriptions. I personally declined as I saw nothing wrong with the tap water I drank. About a week after this began is when things started to happen. It was 9 p.m. on a June night. I was getting around for my night shift job when I heard a loud scream come from the house 2 doors down. At first I played it off as people being rowdy. But what I heard after that shocked me to the core. I heard another loud scream and someone yell, "It's eating him. Help." My heart began to race. I grabbed my pistol and ran over to see what was going on. Big mistake. From what I saw, I wish I would have stayed inside. There in front of me were 5 pale and slender humanoid creatures. 3 were shredding the corpse of a dead woman and the other 2 were working on killing another woman. I was frozen in pure disbelief as to what I was seeing. To this very moment, I recollected as the moment something inside me broke. I opened my mouth to scream, but stopped myself. I had to get a grip. I had to do something. But my body was frozen. Like when you were trying to do something in a dream. I only became unfrozen when it looked up at me. It was like these creatures were synchronized. When one looked at me, all of them paused and looked straight into my soul. I raised my pistol and fired a shot straight into its head. The creature let out a scream in pain. With the help of an instant adrenaline rush, I ran. I ran back to my house, not even turning back to look. I knew they were in close pursuit of me. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. I could hear the creatures rush onto the front porch, slamming into the door. Would the door hold? Would I be able to shoot them all if they came in? I quickly ran for my bedroom to grab my 12-gauge shotgun, my phone and charger, and ran for the attic. As I ascended the steps, I could hear a terrible scratching sound. Like nails on a chalkboard. They were trying to get in. Just as I pulled the steps to the attic back up, I heard a loud crash and the sound of hurried footsteps towards my position. I sat as still and as quietly as possible for what seemed like forever. In real time, it had only been 6 hours. But that's how long it took for the creatures to give up their search. I thought to myself during the time, what are these things? Are they alien? I was shaking and my heart was racing, in fear the creatures would find a way up to the attic. I knew I probably could only down 2 of them if they got in before I became like my neighbors. Quietly I checked my cell phone. It was 3 a.m. I tried calling 911. But the phone just rang. I decided to just unroll a sleeping bag I had stored up in here and try to sleep. Sleep did not come easy, but I was lucky to get 5 hours. I had to pee really bad after I woke up, but I didn't dare move. What if they were intelligent enough to wait in my house for me to come out? After holding it in for nearly 3 hours, I decided to pee in an empty water bottle I found in my camping supplies storage. I decided I would crack the attic door open and peek at what was below me. After working up the nerves and courage, I saw that the room below was empty, but the walls and floor were torn up. I cursed under my breath and shut the attic door quietly. I told myself that I would wait another day up here just in case, and then venture out to grab some food and water as I did not have time to grab them before. I slept some more. The house was quiet. Almost too quiet. The power had gone out that first night, and had not been restored, so I had no way of charging my phone. I turned it off to conserve as much battery as I could. After I woke up, I turned on my phone to find I had no service, an indication of a widespread power outage. Great. I grabbed my backpack, and my shotgun, and prepared to venture back out. Very slowly and as quietly as I could, I climbed back down. About halfway down the ladder, I could have swore I heard a creak in the kitchen. I froze, for a second, before deciding to climb back up. I'm glad I did. Because just as I climbed back into the attic, I heard a shriek and fast heavy footsteps coming my direction. I pulled the ladder back up just in time and shut the door. But now the creature knew where I was. At this point, I began cursing. I knew I was screwed. If this creature could climb, it would rip this door open and I'd be a goner. I had to get out. I began digging through the camping supplies storage, grabbing what I could. I'd have to run so I couldn't grab so much to weigh me down, but essentials to survive on the run with. I also had to formate a plan on how I was going to get out of this attic. I grabbed the hatchet out, and decided I had to get through the wall. I pulled the insulation away from the wall and began hitting it. I knew the noise would attract all of the creatures in the area, so I worked as quickly as I could. Soon I could hear them below scratching and tearing at the walls. Just as I broke through the wall, one of the creatures pulled the attic door down and these things were smart enough to climb. Just as it crested over the edge, I raised the shotgun and fired a round directly into its head. Not even a scream escaped it as it fell back. To my surprise, the others didn't rush up. I cocked the shotgun fully expecting another creature to pursue me. But I could hear the awful sound of flesh being torn. Were they eating it? No time to find out. I jumped out of the hole in the wall and landed hard on the grass below. I began running. I knew it wasn't long before they finished whatever they were doing and realized I wasn't up in the attic anymore. As I ran down the road, I realized more of the creatures were running out of the houses and towards me. I pulled out my pistol and began shooting at them. I was screwed. There were too many. They began closing in fast on me, when out of nowhere, I heard gunshots and the creature to my left shrieked in pain and fell to the ground. Then the others pounced on it and began tearing it to shreds. A woman on the roof of the house screamed at me to climb up to her. She didn't have to tell me twice. Once I was up on top, she opened a small hatch and ushered me inside. Another attic. She introduced herself as Natalie. She asked me for my name, which I responded Alex. We shook hands and I thanked her for saving me. She told me that the creatures were a direct result of the water, and she believes it was a sick experiment conducted by the government that got way out of hand. We spent the rest of the night sitting quietly. Apparently the creatures were hostile to each other unless eating, and as I had seen before, would not hesitate to eat a wounded or dead creature. Natalie's theory was that if we evaded them long enough, they would kill each other and we could escape. We waited for 2 weeks in that attic. Natalie informed me we would have to move soon, but knew where we could go. The creatures seemed more active at night than day, but would fight with each other instead of hunt, which gave us optimal time for rest. When it got quiet we discussed our lives. I found out she was nurse at the hospital in a major city 45 minutes away. She said that she had early insight of the mass hospitalizations with an unknown waterborne pathogen. She said the patients were taken into military tents and never came out. She assumed they were neutralized before the transformation could take place. This had sent a cold shiver throughout my body. To think that these creatures were people. Natalie also explained she didn't know the extent of the water that had been contaminated. We both had drank tap water and were experiencing no symptoms or signs of infection. I theorized that it could be the water from the purification facility. Natalie agreed, but I could see she was still skeptical of my theory. I tried to ask her more about what she thought, but she seemed unwilling to talk any more about it. She said she was tired and needed to sleep. I agreed to take first watch. She awoke later that night, and said I could sleep. I fell deep asleep knowing that I had someone watching out. It was the first time I rested well that week. I woke up just before dawn to the sound of one of the creatures bellowing. We could hear them running up and down the street for nearly an hour before all that could be heard were birds chirping. Natalie said that she was going to take a look, and start planning for our escape. She carefully opened the attic door, and slowly walked down the steps into the house. I followed with my pistol drawn. As we entered the living room, we both noticed the creature standing in front of one of the windows. It had its back turned to us, so it did not see us, but this was too close. Natalie turned around and began to usher me back towards the attack when all of a sudden I mistakenly kicked a piece of wood laying on the ground, tripped and fell flat on my face. Natalie's reactions were lightning fast. "So we're the creatures." It began bellowing and Natalie ripped me back up onto my feet by the collar of shirt. The creature smashed right through the window, rolling and skidding like a crazed dog trying to chase a cat on a slippery floor. We booked it to the steps. I ushered Natalie back up and turned to face the oncoming creature. I fired 3 shots into it, but its momentum was like a speeding truck. It slammed into me, knocking the wind out of me. My vision was distorted and for a few seconds my hearing went out. Trying to gasp for air, I lay there exposed to the oncoming horde. Using every last bit of strength, I pulled myself back up, and screamed at Natalie to close the attic door. The creatures lunged up towards her, she slammed the door in their face, knocking one back into another, starting a fight between the creatures. I dove into the bathroom, rolling into the bathtub. I only had 7 rounds left in my pistol, and more than 10 creatures out in the hall. I considered offing myself right then and there. To spare myself the literal hell it would be to get ripped apart by these things. I feel for the poor damned souls who had to suffer that fate. Just as I thought the creatures were about to run in and rip me to shreds, I heard a scream from outside. The creatures darted out of the house, nearly taking a wall down. My heart sank as I was hoping the scream didn't come from Natalie. I quickly got up and ran for the attic. I yelled for Natalie to let me in. Nothing. I yelled again a little louder, hoping the creatures wouldn't turn back. She popped the door open and reached down for me. With some struggle, I was able to climb back into the attic, where I collapsed onto the floor on my back, breathing heavily. As I caught my breath, I could no longer hear the creatures outside. Natalie told me we were leaving no matter what the next morning. We both rested that night. The next morning Natalie shook me awake, and told me to get ready to run. We snuck down the ladder and through the house quiet as possible, but hastily. As soon as our feet hit the grass outside, we both broke into a sprint. We were lucky to avoid the creatures who were now searching the house next to our refuge. We ran into a heavily forested area where we stopped to catch our breaths. Natalie revealed a map to me she had. She explained that the map was given to her by her brother, who was in the National Guard, of a safe house that she and I would permit it into, should it still stand. The safe house was 36 miles from us currently, meaning we would have to travel constantly with short breaks. We couldn't afford to hunker down anywhere unless absolutely necessary. For the first 5 miles, we were very lucky not to encounter a single creature. But just before hitting the 6th mile in, we crested over top of a small hill, and what we saw below was enough to make me want to turn back and run to the attic. Natalie grabbed my arm. Below was a horde of creatures. The creatures wandered aimlessly, occasionally fighting and bellowing. There were way too many below to try and sneak around. Natalie quietly pulled out and opened up the map. Studying it for a few minutes, she then handed it to me and pointed at a river we could potentially swim down to avoid the creatures. I nodded my head and folded the map back up. We turned back toward the river. The river was about 2 miles back, far enough away from that horde that they wouldn't hear us swimming through it. Luckily the current did most of the work for us, as we could just tread water. As we approached the clearing, I took notice of the horizon, and how much I had not been paying attention to. There were several clouds of smoke coming from multiple locations. The smoke was black, suggesting the locations were burning out of control. I began to realize this didn't just happen here. It happened on a much larger scale. The realization that no one is coming to save you, the police or military, is frightening. We were on our own. After floating the river for nearly half the day, Natalie said to swim to shore. We managed to sneak past the creatures and complete 18 miles of the journey. Halfway there, my hope of survival had just increased like the moment Natalie first saved me. It was definitely a mood booster. Night fell, and spending that first night outside with creatures potentially roaming the yard was terrifying. I was tired. My whole body ached. But my will to not risk being caught by one of those things kept me going. We couldn't see hardly anything a few feet in front of us, and we had both decided using flashlights would be too risky, as if those creatures saw, it would be game over. Suddenly, it began to rain. With lightning and thunder. The flashes of lightning helped to see the area around us for a brief moment, but I kept expecting to see a flash of lightning and the creatures like a scene from a fictional horror movie. Luckily we made it, after a long night of walking. The safe house was well hidden from plain sight, so it was a matter of finding it. After about an hour of walking what seemed like in circles, we heard heavy footsteps from behind us. Fully expecting it to be the creatures, I drew my pistol and braced myself. Suddenly from the trees several men in uniform ran up to us, demanding us to drop our weapons. We did as we were told and dropped to our knees. One of the troopers asked me if I was infected, To which I replied, I don't think so. The troopers gathered us up quickly and rushed us into the safe house. We were met with a team of medics who rushed us into a large room full of cots. I sat down on one next to Natalie. The medic brought us bottled water. Just as I was about to take a drink, Natalie screamed and swatted it from my hands. She was immediately restrained. To my surprise, I jumped up and yelled, "What the hell is going on?" Natalie began screaming, "Don't drink the water. You'll turn into one of those things." One of the medics, accompanied by troopers, escorted her out of the room. I asked the other medic what she meant by that, and if it was the truth. He looked at me, and sighed after a moment. "Yes, you will, but only with the water from that facility." In raw and utter disbelief, I fell back against the wall. All those people who bought that subscription. All those people who drank the water. All poisoned and turned into mindless flesh-eating monstrosities. The medic then told me what had really happened. The government had been experimenting on creating superhuman candidates to test in military force. All the people who drank the water were test subjects. Unbeknownst to them, the military fractured after the creatures were unleashed. Most top officials who weren't involved declared it as an attack on Americans in active war. The others who were involved tried to stop the creatures, realizing their horrible mistake. They were defeated by the creatures. The medic told me to get some rest, and that there would be a briefing tomorrow for Natalie, me and some of the other survivors. The next morning I woke up to Natalie sleeping in the cot next to me. When she woke up, she immediately began sobbing. I tried to comfort her the best I could and ask her what was wrong, but she wanted to be left alone. I got up and walked around the safe house. A tired-looking trooper stood outside the room. He told me that Natalie's brother David was killed trying to fend off an attack from the creatures. I felt horrible. Growing up a single child of the family, I had no idea what it would be like to lose your brother. When Natalie got herself together, she hugged me and thanked me for everything. At the briefing, they explained to us how this had spread across the entire country, and that help most likely was not on the way. This was our new reality. We could fight for a secure future, or we could accept defeat and die horribly. Both Natalie and I chose to join in the fight. The soldiers mentioned that we would soon be making the journey to Traverse City, where they had established radio contact with another large group of survivors. The safe house had power and access to a very limited network, so I guess I'm leaving this story here for anyone who may be fortunate to find it. We have learned from mistakes and have been very fortunate to survive. Should you drink water, collect it from the rivers and lakes. Boil it. Avoid bottled water. I know that sounds reverse, but it's the best way to avoid becoming one of those things. Don't drink the water. Best of luck to any survivors out there. Perhaps someday, we will be free of this nightmare. Don't lose hope.